obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Our Parking Industry Podcast. I am Krista Olien, and I'm here with Clyde Wilson and Leigh Thomas. Our little micro team of 3 got to visit the West Coast for a project that we're doing in San Mateo. But we also mixed in some fun, so we're excited to talk through some of those things and experiences that we got to enjoy while we were on the West Coast for a project. So first, to start off, we did a tour and did a site visit for a campus of commercial office buildings. That was the job while we were there. We had some interesting experiences, and then we also got to explore the city of San Francisco and do some touristy things and see some old sites and talk through old stories with Clyde, which is always a great experience. So time well spent. Clyde, what was your favorite part of the trip to the West Coast?
Well, gosh, I didn't know you were going to ask me this, because my favorite part is always the work part instead of the touristy part. But in this particular case, I think the touristy was pretty good, right? But we got to look at a great location that has some very specific complexities to it. So it's always fun to look at that and then walk away from there trying to think, do I have what I need to be able to solve this problem? And so we had a great team here. You guys did a great job. As I said, you guys did a much better job of coming home with the right pictures than I did, and a great understanding of the project. So this was a great trip for me. You know, most of my life, 40 years of traveling in the parking business, 90% of it was by myself. And so now I have this wonderful opportunity to travel with 2 great people that I enjoy every trip with. Your guys are easy to travel with, and that's always one of the things that I look for, because traveling for some people is hard. And when it's hard for them, it becomes hard for me. So you guys are easy to travel with, and it was a fun trip. So we covered a lot of business, and then we fortunately had planned well enough that we had the time in there to do some fun stuff. And I was stationed on the West Coast, not far from where we were. My first assignment in the military was Travis Air Force Base in California. So I got to sit there for 6 months worried about where I was going next. And so it was I spent a lot of time. You know, I was a kid from Nashville, Tennessee. This was my first time in California, and well, not my first time in California, but my first time in that part of California, where there are some sites there that you don't normally see, at least in 70?
Yeah, so whenever we get the opportunity to spend time with Clyde on a location or in an area outside of our home base, we always learn something new, each of us. And I love hearing Clyde's stories. We do our little sub podcast of stories on the road as part of our parking industry podcast. And for this trip, one of my favorite stories that we got to learn was about Clyde's time over there. We got to hear a song called Mill Valley, and Mill Valley is a little suburb of San Francisco, and it's very sentimental to Clyde. So Clyde, tell us about Mill Valley and how that has impacted you, and maybe a little history about the song and where it came from and originated from.
Mill Valley is a song that came out. It hit the airways about probably July. So I came into California on May 15th is when I went from all of my training time then to my first assignment. So that was in May 15th at Travis Air Force Base, which most people don't know this, but that was always the stopping off point and the going over point for Vietnam. We got everybody coming back. We had everybody going over, plus all the medical and other stuff coming in. So you were, and everybody in my barracks had just come back. So it was a trying time. This cute little song came out in the time when most of the songs were anti-war demonstration songs, hippie songs, all this stuff. And even though there were a couple of nice songs that came out during that time, but right in that particular time, Mill Valley came out. And Mill Valley was a song written by Miss Abrams, who was she actually wasn't. We always were told it was her 3rd grade class. As it turns out, I've learned since then She was actually a kindergarten teacher. And when we started to produce the songs, the producer said, look, kindergartners, when they're singing, they think yelling is great, right? So we've got to move up the scale a little bit. So she went up to the third grade class. So it was called Miss Abrams' third grade class. And so she wrote this song about this little community across the bridge, because anybody listening to this from the West Coast knows exactly where it is. Mill Valley, even then, was a very ritzy place. Very small, very ritzy, just across the Golden Gate Bridge. And it was this song about Mill Valley and loving Mill Valley. And it was just nice. And they play, of course, it's on the West Coast. Her producers, one of her producers, who was probably 29 or 30 at the time, and nobody knew who he was Francis Ford Coppola. So this thing was on the radio all day and all night. It was constantly playing it. So during a time that was a difficult time, it was this nice, cheery song. And so I remembered it. And apparently it made the top 10 list there and supposedly made the top 10 list worldwide. I don't know. Nobody in Nashville knew what the heck I was talking about when it came out. But it was a very nice song written about Mill Valley. So her story was she was from Cleveland, had done some early work singing as right out of school in New York. Somehow it ended up in San Francisco looking for a job. And she just went to an interview, had no idea what Mill Valley was. She goes to an interview at Mill Valley. Of course, it's a wonderful place. And so on Christmas Day, she was walking around trying to think of something, and she wrote this song. Walking around, she stopped at a bus stop and sat down at the bus stop and wrote the song, then went back and taught it to her kids. So I'm sorry, I probably talked too much about the song, but it was a very, very nice song that I remember very well at a very difficult time in my life because, at that particular, for 6 months there, it was every day you wonder when you're going to get your orders to go to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And you happen to certainly be in the right place to end up in Vietnam. For those of you who know me know that I managed to miss that. I went to, froze to death at the North Pole instead of Vietnam. While those guys were burning up in heat and humidity, I was freezing, but they were getting shot at. The polar bears were getting shot at.
Yeah, I think just as human beings, we always need something positive to hold on to. And so it was really cool to see your reaction and telling us the story. And Leigh and I had the opportunity to hear the song and just kind of make that connection that we have not had an experience like that in our lifetime, most likely. And so having the opportunity to see how a song can impact and have emotions this
Mm-hmm.
far removed from when the time was. So that was really neat and a very personal experience that our team got to do and grow with. So I really enjoyed it. And it may seem like not much, but for our team, it was really impactful and really cool.
Thank you.
And it's one of those things for me that I remember where I was and what I was thinking about when I heard the song and we had that whole team bonding experience in San Francisco. Because I remember we were in San Francisco and we were driving in these really tight roads and there was just cars parked all along the curb. And I was trying to take it all in and I was appreciating the architecture and the slope of the streets was crazy to me. I am from Texas and Idaho, where streets are mostly flat. And I was just taking all of that in. And then we heard the song and I remember how we connected right then. But there was a lot of business going on in my mind. So let's talk about the on-street parking that we saw while we were listening to this song. What did we see in San Francisco? What did we take away from it?
I'll try to keep this short. Because you guys weren't around during the particular time that this started, and I don't even know that I now remember exactly when it started, but it seemed like 20 years ago. San Francisco had a mess in downtown on-street parking, and one of the problems that they had, and we, the parking network, were only tiny amount involved in this, but we were doing a job in San Francisco back in probably 2025 or so. I don't remember, or 2005. It looked to me like in the job we were doing that the on-street had some impact on us. So I decided on-street wasn't a part of our job, but I decided to get on-street and take a look. So I start doing a survey of the streets around this project. Well, 75% of the cars on street had handicap placards on them, accessible placards. So everybody was going to their doctor, and this is San Francisco, right? So everybody was getting the handicap placards, putting them on their car, parking on the street for free. So the street, instead of parking in a garage, everybody was on the street. So the streets were a mess. There was no place to park on the streets. All of the spaces were full. Well, a few years later, not long after this, along comes, I won't mention his name badly, but because he just passed away, but along comes a book and about on-street parking, and some people pick up on some of the things that were in the book that were not accurate, very much not accurate, and decided that they could go sell the city of San Francisco, that these were problems with San Francisco and they could solve the problem. So this huge plan was created to put dots on every parking space, transmit the information back to a central processor, put it on signs all over the city and roadways, telling everybody, because this was a little bit before really good smartphones were out, so you couldn't put it on their phone. Now, you could, but it wasn't really prepared for them. So they put signs all over the city saying parking this way, parking that way, parking that way. They did all this not seeming to understand one very basic thing. If I'm going downtown to park, you can tell me where a parking space is all you want to, but I'm going to the one over there that's next to my building. So I don't care if you told me there's one 4 blocks down and to the left. I'm going here. So $20 million later and an awful lot of work, they just let the hockey pucks in the road, the batteries go out, and had to scrap the project. So I don't know now, and I haven't kept up with this really closely. It was such a disaster. Well, I won't go into that detail, but there were some other details that went along with it, none of them really good. And so San Francisco's ended up, as you guys just saw, from first-time observers in downtown with an eye for parking. May have been there before, but now you look at things a little differently. It was a mess. There's cars everywhere. All the spaces are filled. It was difficult even for us to find a place to park at, what was it, 5 o'clock in the afternoon?
When on a weekday.
On a weekday, right, on a weekday. So it was difficult for us to find a place to park because we needed to play another little trick we were about to play. So downtown San Francisco has wasted a lot of money trying to do something that the people who were telling them that they could do this hadn't really ever worked on street, and sold a story. It didn't ever pan out.
Yeah, speaking of story, I think we might need a book review episode just to talk through that book and kind of bust some of the myths that have been put out there by that. And there's some truths in it too, so we'll be happy to talk through that too. But I think we need a book review episode.
We probably do. You know, the two things that they used to really create this thing that happened in San Francisco. At some point after that, I started really paying attention to it and decided these numbers don't look right to me. And so I kind of went out in my own way and proved them. So I go to John Van Horn and tell it to John and Barbara Chance. We get Barbara on the phone. We're trying to figure out what to do. So John picks up the phone and calls the author of this while I'm sitting there in the room and starts questioning him. And his comment was, well, it's only numbers. But it was something that a salesman could pick up and grasp onto and sold it as fact. And cities, and we just ran into one while we were there. Part of this story is going to drift right into one of those other little cities out there that's a believer.
Yes. So one of the things Clyde alluded to a minute ago was another little project that we did while we were there. We had the opportunity to take not one, but 2 rides in a Waymo. So if you don't know what a Waymo is, it's an autonomous vehicle service. So it's like Uber, but with no driver. And a couple of my takeaways from our Waymo ride were, it was pretty easy. So you have to get the app. That's one step that you have to do, non-negotiable. And then you sign up for your ride. It uses Bluetooth whenever you're in proximity of the vehicle. The door handles, it's a special car. The door handles pop out. So the only way you can get into the vehicle is if your device that reserved the ride with Bluetooth activated is next to it. So I thought that was really cool from a safety standpoint, that nobody else can hop in from the other side or anything like that. And just it was easy. It was so easy. We did have to wait a little bit, and we did see a few kind of pass us by that were empty, so it felt a little strange, but they're very recognizable. So I had to ask myself, how many times am I standing there waiting for my Uber that empty Uber drivers are just driving by, but they're not as identifiable? So maybe that's just something to think about with how recognizable the Waymo cars are, something to consider. But I liked it. I thought it was really neat. It was definitely an experience. Leigh, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with you. It was recognizable. It did feel very safe. And I appreciated the level of communication that the platform gave us. For example, as we were driving to the area where we were going to jump in the Waymo, I got on my app and I read all of the preliminary instructions, and I felt very educated. Clyde is often talking about how today's customer is educated and people need to meet customers where they are. I felt like a very informed consumer that day. But the app told us exactly where to stand and told us an accurate wait time. And then sure enough, we could see the very recognizable Waymo coming our direction. It always stopped right where it said it was going to stop. And remember how it had that dome on the top and it had our initials so that we knew that this one is ours. Yeah.
That was good.
And then remind me, once we got in and got the doors closed, there was a screen that was accessible in the back seat. Remind me, what were all the things that we had to do or we had the option to do from that console?
Yeah, there was a screen in the front seat or in the back seat. So if you're one of those that doesn't like to ride in the front seat of an Uber, you have the option to do all the features from the back seat and be kind of chauffeured around by the autonomous vehicle, which sounds a little strange. But yeah, it had, once you were in and once the doors were all closed, so it has a lot of parameters that have to be met for the vehicle to start operating and driving and moving. So all the doors had to be closed all the way. You had to engage your seat belts and those kinds of things. So it was, yeah. And then you push the button that you were all set to go and it verified all the parameters and then you were on your way. It uses its turn signal. You can hear it clicking inside, like all the things. But we have some really fun videos that we're going to post on our social medias that you can reference and watch if you want to see what it's all about. And we've kind of joked a little bit, but we think the parking network might need an autonomous vehicle for our next investment. I don't know. Clyde, what were some of your takeaways?
Most definitely for the autonomous vehicle. After riding in this, and it was very, very nice. We'll do a podcast on this when we're sure we're educated enough to do that, because there's been all of this discussion over the last few years about autonomous vehicles and it changing the parking industry. The reality is, in our view, at least today, but we have a lot more work to do. It may change the parking industry. The only thing that the change is going to be, we're going to have more cars because it is so convenient. People are going to make trips now that they would not have made before. If they had to get in a car on a busy night to go to somewhere, they may not have made. But I started out in the front seat, passenger seat. There was no driver. These two guys got in the back seat, so they were back there, kicked back, laughing. And I was the first one to be killed in the accident if the Waymo went crazy. But no, it was very easy. You know, San Francisco is difficult to drive around in. I thought I was sold pretty quickly that, so I can sit here, if this is my car, and go wherever I want to go in San Francisco, and I don't have to deal with this crazy traffic in San Francisco. This is great. When do I get mine? Yes, Krista just told me when mine's coming, right?
Hold her to it, Clyde. Yeah, and it wasn't expensive. I thought it would be very expensive.
Yeah, it was actually cheaper than what an Uber would be in the area. And there was no like, oh, tip your driver situation. So in the long run, it was cheaper. And whether that changes in the future, whenever they really gain traction, is, time will tell. But it was cheaper.
Remember something very important. And the reason for all the empty empty Waymos we saw running around, this is a test city.
Mm-hmm.
The price is down to get people like us crazy enough to do this, to get one, to pick us up and drive us around. And also the other ones running around, they're just constantly being tested.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a huge expense on the part of the people that are backing this program, I think because they see the long-term influence of this. So we did see, and the price was certainly not something 5 years from now, we won't get that price for running around San Francisco.
Yeah, I live outside of Austin, and I know Austin is being tested. I have some friends that work for Google, and part of their homework is to take a Waymo ride just so the vehicles can have the time and opportunity and customers to learn the path and learn all the different things about the city of Austin. So it's adaptive and it's very, very interesting. Also, while we were there, we did see other brands of autonomous vehicle companies driving around, learning the city and that kind of thing. So do y'all have any reflections on those? I think we saw two different ones driving around, but none of them are operational, right?
They're not.
They haven't been launched.
I think it's in doing our early research before we went to California, Leigh and I were doing some work, and I think the company is Zoox, Z-O-O-X, and theirs is the one, Leigh, that we saw that there's no steering wheel. There's nothing. It's 2 bench seats. The door opens, you hop in, you sit on the bench seats, and it drives around. We really like that one too, so I'm kind of partial to that one.
Yeah. And the Waymo was a real car, like a normal car with the normal driver's seat. The seatbelt was pre-buckled. So the seatbelt of the driver's seat was buckled, but you could see the steering wheel turning and, doing all the things that if there was someone physically driving it would look very similar. Another observation that I had was whenever I was telling some friends about this and, they had tons of questions. They're like, what in the world? But whenever they were posing questions, one of them I found interesting was, what if a dog runs out in the road? And I said, well, we got to see what happens if people run out in the road. So we had a great opportunity to see that. In San Francisco, there's a lot of foot traffic, a lot of pedestrians. And so whenever our car or others that we observed driving around, whenever they would approach a intersection and somebody was standing on the corner waiting to cross the street, if they were too close, the cameras on the outside would recognize that and identify it, and it would stop. Like there was no delay. It was really immediate. So I thought that was really interesting, and something that I learned is that I don't really have a concern about something running out in front of it because we weren't going at a really high speed. So that is something I wonder, if you're on a highway, what does that look like for the people inside? Are you kind of, do you have whiplash after you stop for something running out in front of you, or what is the adaptive technology that determines it's too dangerous to stop for this, or it's safe to stop at that at that interval of speed? So I'm curious to see what the highway version of Waymo looks like, because we only experienced the city version where you're not traveling at high rates of speed.
Yeah, and remember, sorry, Clyde.
No, go ahead, Leigh.
Remember when we were headed out, we were on that 2-lane road with the barrier on each side and no shoulder. We were in the right lane and going at a relatively slow speed, but the left lane was completely stopped because a Waymo was stopped. It had picked up something with its cameras, even though there was nothing there, and it was causing a bit of a traffic jam.
And it had its hazards turned on. Like it turned those on, activated that.
Right. Was that the Waymo traffic jam that we saw?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we were curious, is there someone inside? Are they waiting? Can they get out? We don't know.
Yeah, and I wonder if someone had been inside, is there someone talking to the rider? Like what is the procedure in that situation?
I think, and so I'm speaking again, we haven't done enough research to really talk about this very much other than our experience. But Waymo is considered a level 4. Level 5 is a fully autonomous car that you would have, and it does everything on its own. There's no input from anybody. But this Waymo's a level 4 because they are monitored, and somebody from somewhere can take control and make changes or do assistance for that thing. So what we were probably seeing was something was not exactly right. So the person inside the vehicle had pushed the button to call the control center, that was then trying to take control of the vehicle. My only comment was I never for a minute, we took 2 trips. We went to a parking garage that was a former customer, a garage that we had worked on years ago, still a customer we had worked on years ago. So I thought, well, I know that garage. So we went there to find our start point, call Waymo, and then went down to the Ferry Building, got out, called another Waymo, and got back in and went back to our car. I never felt unsafe in there, ever.
Yeah.
And it was pretty quickly that the 3 of us started talking, especially when we got to the Ferry Building and we got on to go back, then they let me move to the back seat. Leigh went to the front seat. So there was totally different experience because I'm in the back seat and we were just talking. I wasn't paying a bit of attention to what was going on.
Yeah.
And that all of a sudden I realized I felt comfortable enough to not really worry about what was happening outside. Thought that was great. Interesting. There's a little glimpse of the future. What exactly all this looks like in 10 years from now, who'll know? But I think we're definitely headed that direction.
Yeah, after the experience, it was fun to come home. I have 3 teenagers at my house, and I was telling them all about this autonomous car. And so as a family, we got to thinking about, I wonder how long it will be till this is normal. And I asked
I know it's coming.
Yeah, I asked my teenagers who are currently, they either have their driver's license or are getting a permit or are looking forward to a driver's license. I asked them, what do you think about the fact that your children might not get a driver's license? What if Waymos are of the future and you are the last generation to independently maneuver a vehicle? And they were kind of intrigued by that idea. But my daughter, who is definitely the most independent of the 3, was indignant. And she said, well, I will teach my children to drive regardless of autonomous vehicles being available in our area. My children will be independent and educated. And I thought, well, that is how it is with every generation. There's a remnant in every generation who holds so tightly to those older customs. So it's interesting to think about how this could impact our culture, impact education, impact future generations. Very cool.
Very interesting. And that was a great question. I really enjoyed it when you told me their reactions. And because I don't know, you can't look back that far back and see what would have been my reaction to not driving. And it's hard to look back. I don't know, but I appreciate their, driving is such a privilege and it's a freedom, and they're teenagers. So they're not really able to think all the way through hey, I just get in the car and go anywhere. Mom will let me go anywhere because she shouldn't care about traffic and but they haven't really thought through that all the way yet. But it's interesting. And it is coming. There's no question that there's an awful lot of money and time being put into this. So I think the trip to San Francisco convinced me even more that this is coming. How quickly it gets here. We've done a lot of discussion internally with our group about the process of development of a project or a product. So exactly what the timing's going to be before it happens, I don't know. But Leigh's kids are probably 10 years away from, or at least Leigh's hoping, 10 years away from having children, and then 18 years, so 28 years away from driving, or 16, so 26 years away from driving. 26 years from now, they won't need a driver's license would not need to do that. I think government is going to say you have to have a driver's license to hail a car and get in, so that people can't put their kid in a car and send them off and go drive around for a while, get out of the house.
I think one of the narratives that we've heard kind of in the parking industry is that there will need to be, and you alluded to this a little bit, Clyde, there will need to be less parking whenever autonomous vehicles become more available. And I think TPN's takeaway from that is that, the narrative is pushing that the autonomous vehicle will take the person to work, drop them off, and then return back to home base, which is wherever they originated. And if they're personal vehicles, we feel like that is not accurate in some regards. That why would it take the time to drive all the way back, make a double trip, basically go all the way back to where it came from, and then come all the way back to pick up the patron? So what are your thoughts on that, Clyde, as far as, will it require the same amount or more parking? Will it cause more congestion on the streets if autonomous vehicles are making double trips? What does that look like in your perspective?
Well, again, we're talking about something that we haven't had the opportunity to study, but it's a great question. So, number one, we barely have enough street capacity to get people to work, much less to get them to work and then put those same cars back on the street heading back home. So now you have twice as many cars on the street, and we just don't have the street capacity for that. But the other thing with questions like that, it's so hard to think through. When you look out on the street in the heavy traffic, there are people in there that are not going to work. They're at work driving to the next city or the next place way over there that's 30 miles or 40 miles from home. They're not going to send their car 40 miles back home. So all this is really, in the limited amount of time, we've really thought through it. And again, we haven't done the research. But I can tell you this crew is going to do the research, and we'll have something interesting out there for you pretty soon. We've written a couple of articles, but we still haven't done all the research that I think now that we've ridden in an autonomous car, that really caused us to have more questions than we had before, and certainly more questions than answers. So we have some more work to do. But when you start really surveying the people on the street, you'll find out not everybody is going downtown to work. People are going all over the place. People are going shopping, they're going to breakfast, they're going to lunch, they're going to meet somebody. So those cars, I don't believe you're going to pull into a restaurant 10 miles from home and send your car home and then call it to come back to you when you finish lunch. I think you're going to park right there. The reason this conversation started was, the Parking Network put this in an article a couple of months ago, I think. The first time this came up was a really good friend of mine in the real estate business was at the Urban Land Institute convention about 7 or 8 years ago when autonomous vehicles first hit the market, that the discussions really started, right? And he calls me and he says, Clyde, I'm at the Urban Land Institute and I'm standing outside this room, and the room is autonomous cars. After autonomous cars, we're not going to need any parking spaces. So what do we do with our garages? And they're talking about turning the roof into gardens and taking all the parking garages and building offices and apartments in them. And I said, what? There's nothing in this that says these cars are going to replace parking. They're just a way for us to get in the car and go to work. Ride sharing, the big discussion was, well, if it's an autonomous car and it can do this, you can get out of your car and then you can turn it into a ride share car, or you can ride share. I think we've already seen the limit on ride sharing now. Autonomous cars will certainly become the ride share vehicles of the future, but they're not going to take over our private cars and take us to work or to wherever we want to go every day. So those things are certainly a lot of discussion, but those are the facts that we know today just aren't holding out. We're going to need a car to get to work. You've got to get out of the car, go to work. You're not going to send it home. We don't have the street capacity to send them home. And we have other bigger transportation issues than that one. When you start really looking at transportation and the issues that we're having, the problems are much larger than worrying about autonomous cars.
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever we whenever we rode in the Waymo, our trip was to the Ferry Building. And you have some interesting stories, Clyde, about the Ferry Building. Do you want to tell kind of TPN's historical involvement with the Ferry Building?
Quickly, this was a job we were doing many years ago, and the Ferry Building was under renovation to bring in a lot more retail, customer-oriented type services inside the Ferry Building. And so there were 2 parking facilities close to the Ferry Building that were used by Ferry Building customers. And so we were hired to take a look at this by the people who were in charge of the development. And it was interesting because we were trying to do one of the first, and I don't remember when this was, but we were trying to make way back when, 2 surface parking lots communicate with each other and back to a central point. Well, 20 years ago, that was a challenge to be able to do that. And one of the challenges was we experimented with it. We had to get an antenna up where we could communicate with both surface lots and then back to us. So the Ferry Building is a historic building, and it was under renovation, and I couldn't understand it, but they wouldn't let me put an antenna right up on top of the ferry. So we managed to try to trick them and put it kind of right around close to the flagpole so that it was not noticeable. And
camouflaged.
It camouflaged.
Yeah.
And it kind of worked for a while. I looked up there when we were there to see if there was an antenna up there. I didn't see it. So somebody figured it out and yanked it out. Of course, what really happened was time went by, and that was old technology, and it got ripped out because nobody needed it. Yeah, we have a long history with the Ferry Building, and it was always, every time I go back, I always like to go see what they've done to it. And it was a very much of a tourist attraction with people going. There's a great restaurant in there, and there's a lot of other things to see too. So there's a lot been done to the Ferry Building. It's always an interesting place, and still a ferry building.
Yeah.
The people who live across the bay come back and forth to work every morning to the Ferry Building on a ferry.
I have a small confession.
Not an autonomous ferry.
Yeah, I have a confession about the Ferry Building. While we were driving to the Ferry Building, the whole time I was sitting in the back seat and I was thinking, Leigh, be rational. Ferry Building. Is this ferry, 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 or like Tinkerbell Ferry Building? I don't know. But I knew to keep my mouth shut because nobody knows how ignorant you are until you talk, right?
Well,
And when I saw the building, I thought, oh, good. Question answered. Ferry,
Question answered,
Ferry.
right.
I was like,
There were no-
see, ignorant.
There were no Disney fairies running around sprinkling pixie dust around the building.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. It's a very historic building, and certainly just one of those, of all the years of things we work on, we every now and then work on something, and I go, gosh, I never dreamed I'd be working on this. Especially since I was in San Francisco when I was a kid at 19, 20 years old in the service, and I remember the ferry building, never knowing I was coming back. I was coming back to work on it, and then later coming back in a Waymo.
Yeah, in
no
an
idea.
autonomous vehicle.
No
Come
idea
full
what
circle.
was coming. Right, full circle. So that was exciting.
Yeah. So
Also, guys, in 1970, we also went over to Berkeley to take a look, and I won't go into that experience, but in 1970, a young guy from Nashville, Tennessee, hanging around Berkeley for a little bit was interesting.
A whole education, huh?
It was yes, and it was not an education. I went home to tell my parents.
Fair.
all right. Well, we have really enjoyed this episode. Every time we go, like we said, on a travel with our teammates, we always learn so much. And especially with Clyde, we get to hear kind of a little bit more about the history of the involvement in the parking industry and how TPN has made an impact, not just where we are, but across the country, East Coast to West Coast. So we're always grateful to take work trips and get to experience these things that are on the cutting edge of technology, and also take a look back in history at how TPN has shaped the industry. So thank you for spending your time with us today on the Our Parking Industry podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time. To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on Our Parking Industry podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.